I am here with Representative Jordan Pace. Representative Pace represents District 117 out of Berkeley County. You're a commercial real estate broker, and you've been involved in South Carolina politics since you were a teenager. What was it that compelled you to run for the legislature, and what have you been involved in as far as committees since you've been in the State House?
Sure. So the initial, unction to run to begin with was the previous office holder, not the Democrat that I beat, the one before that, the one that she beat, who was a Republican, was, in my opinion, far to the left where the district was. So that was my initial kind of reason to run. Was I didn't feel well represented. The guy voted against constitutional carry. He was, well to the left on most of the main Republican Party issues. And when he wound up losing to the Democrat, I ran against her. Wound up beating her this last time in 22 by, I think, 31%. It was pretty good thumping. Basically for the same reason. I didn't feel well represented by a liberal Republican, so I certainly didn't feel well represented by a self-proclaimed Democratic socialist who's running around Bernie Sanders. So that was the main unction as far as like, I got to do this. Then in that process, I had one kid who's now 2.5, and now I've got another one, a 6-month-old. So that really provides extra motivation to get South Carolina where it should be in an actual free market direction, an actual conservative Republican, or an actual conservative principled place of governance, where I think most of the population would like it to be, but our leadership, our elected officials have not thus far pointed it in that direction. But I think we're heading that direction more so than we have in the past.
So you end up in the General Assembly, you win your election. Mm-hmm. How did you end up hooked up with the Freedom Caucus?
Sure. So I was friends with several of the founding members before there was a Freedom Caucus. Guys like Josiah, RJ, Adam, I befriended several of them, Stuart Jones, many years ago, just because I've been kind of in and around South Carolina politics on a volunteer basis and a semi-professional basis prior to that, working for some nonprofits. And when this little kernel of an idea of like, hey, we need to be organized in a way, because they all voted together and they get, picked on and bullied individually. When that kernel came together, I heard about it. I said, you absolutely must do this if we're going to make a long-lasting impact on the legislature and on South Carolina. We have to be well-organized, well-disciplined, and know where we're pointing, know where we're going, and stick together. So, that's was my introduction to it, even before it actually existed in full.
And for folks, who are avid followers of the General Assembly, they'll know that within the Republicans in the House, you have your kind of standard party line voting GOP. They're going to vote alongside the leadership. And then you guys, the Freedom Caucus guys, kind of pursue an agenda of your own. And sometimes you'll vote with, the mainstream GOP group, but oftentimes you'll be opposing pieces of legislation that the vast majority of Republican representatives in the House support for various reasons. So it's kind of this perpetual tension within the conservative in the House.
That is a way to frame it. However, I would frame it more as the group of us that tend to vote together, oftentimes against leadership, are voting the way that we campaigned. We're voting based on Republican Party platform issues. And when you see us vote against leadership, notice who is voting with leadership. It's not just the quote unquote mainstream Republicans. It's almost always all of the Democrats too are voting with leadership.
It's usually the whole House and then about 17 of you guys.
So it's, sometimes it's referred to as the uniparty. Well, that's why it's not just, all the the Republican leadership often claims or tries to make the claim that uh, we're the ones that are trying to do our own thing. We're trying to stick to the principles that we ran on, that their party, principles, platform principles, and it's the Democrats and those guys a lot of times that are or most of the time that are voting together on things that grow government, bigger spending, handing out money to woke corporations, you name it. But there are times, and I like these times when the mainstream quote unquote Republicans and us vote together on help not harm, um, on bills to protect kids from rampant online pornography and things like that. That when the quote unquote mainline folks come back home to the platform issues, and we can vote together, I like that the best, uh, when they come home to do the right thing. And I
Would
hope
you
we see more of that going in the future.
we have these bills that are kind of the thing that you're going to, if you're an incumbent Republican, put on your mailer,
Mm-hmm.
uh, passed help, not harm, passed constitutional carry. Uh, and I think, those are clearly things that the conservative leadership, the mainstream Republican leadership have pushed that are things that most Republicans would agree or policy agendas that they support.
Yeah.
I think the area that there's the biggest delta between you and them, speaking for the Freedom Caucus, which I think you do a very good job of articulating their points of view, is how the state spends money, how it budgets.
Yeah.
Are we growing state agencies? Are we shrinking them? And I think that that's at the core of a dispute, which is still at play right now, which is
Mm-hmm.
whether the state will restructure its healthcare agencies.
Yeah. And to your point, we have passed some of those things, like I said earlier, but we're often the last Republican state to do them, like whether it's help not harm or constitutional carry. Like we were the last ones in the country of Republican controlled states to pass any of those, and that's not where we should be. So when it comes to money, you're on the money. Not to be too much of a pun there. We see it. Those of us who tend to vote against the budget have certain principles that we're sticking to. Many of us have a red line to say if the tax money, if the budget contains money that's going to pay for abortions, we're not going to vote for it. Or if it's going to grow the size and scope of government, we're not going to vote for it. Or if it has this particular issue, port projects, you name it, those are our red lines. And we try to articulate them and make them clear in the hopes that other members of the Republican Party who campaign this way would see our perspective on it and fix it in how we fix those things and how we spend it. And like I said, I think we're heading in a good direction. However, here we come on this healthcare restructuring bill, and if you ever want a case study in uh, the word gaslighting, this is maybe the best slash worst example of gaslighting that I've ever seen in policymaking, in the time that I've been studying South Carolina politics. When they passed the gas tax several years ago, there was at least a credible claim that they could make that, hey, if we have more money, we can fix the roads. I didn't believe that argument, and I think I've been justified in that disbelief that the roads still aren't fixed and hundreds
Yeah,
of
my commute
millions.
this morning would agree with you.
Right, exactly. Hundreds of millions of dollars are sitting in this lockbox, this Al Gore style lockbox that aren't doing anything. The roads are still jacked up. Um, but in this case, they said to us in the original House bill, this is going to fix all of our myriad fragmented, as they claimed, health agency problems, which we have a lot of health agency problems. Like, we have identified an issue and we agree, I think all of us, the whole General Assembly would agree, we have problems in these health agencies. The solution that they've proffered, whether in S915 or 4927 of the House version, S915 is the most recent one from the Senate, their solution seems to be to grow government in order to fix that problem that we have, or various problems. That to me is not the conservative solution philosophically. On like a 30,000 foot level, growing government never fixes government. And then when you actually get down in the weeds of the bill, which I uh, really got down in the weeds of the bill. The Senate version was 249 pages long. The House version wound up being at 101 pages. The, the fiscal impact study for both of them was inconclusive. Essentially, the Mr. Rainwater and his crew said in that fiscal impact, this is too big and complicated for us to give a reasonable number of how much it will cost or save the taxpayer. So for me, as long as it's growing government and we don't know how much it's going to cost, that's an irresponsible way to attempt to fix a problem, even though we all agree we have a problem. And we've offered various solutions on ways to fix those problems, some short term fixes that could lead into bigger long term restructuring. Uh, to do it. And the irony of the whole thing is, whenever we bring up policies like um, eliminating the income tax, we have the highest income tax in the Southeast. The response we always get is, well, we got to do it a little bit at a time. We have to be deliberate. We can't rush it. We can't do one big swoop. Or when we bring up like, hey, can we deregulate this stuff, whether it's insurance, which is going through the roof for small business owners and shutting down restaurants and venues. Can we look at just a bigger deregulation of that, or pick any industry that's overly regulated, which is most of them. The pushback we often get from our Republican colleagues is, whoa, slow down. We got to talk to everybody. We got to be deliberate. We can't rush this. But when it comes to quote unquote restructuring 6 health agencies by creating a new health agency on top of it, which will have total control over all of them, a giant sweeping, in their own words, behemoth of a bill, we have to push it through no matter what, and we're barely going to discuss it. And I think I spent a total of maybe 2.5 hours at the well between all 3 versions of the bill, picking through and explaining our opposition to it and offering some alternatives. And they just didn't want to hear it. Like, there was no conversation in the background. They didn't want to have a conversation in the background on, okay, well, what can we fix around the edges, or what can we do? No, it was, we're going to pass this. We don't care what you say.
What do you
Thankfully,
make of?
yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry, sir. What do you make of the argument that they often say, okay, well, you're talking about this at the well. Uh, where were you during the subcommittee process when the bill was being really hammered out?
Sure. So the subcommittee was LCI, and I'm not on LCI. Some subcommittees and some committees allow for discussion by non-members of that committee. Some subcommittees even allow non-members to offer amendments and really participate. But that's totally up to the discretion of that subcommittee chair and committee chair. LCI is not a committee where I have found that outside input is welcome or appreciated. Generally, when I attended many of them, the subcommittees for bills in LCI, which is labor, commerce, and industry, I was often met with confused, large confused eyes or scowls or frowny faces, not a lot of welcoming gestures to participate in the discussion, which is different. I have been on some, I've gone to some Ways and Means subcommittees where the subcommittee chair would ask other members who were just there to listen and watch if they had any thoughts or questions. And that's great. That's the way it's supposed to work. So the only opportunity we had to discuss the bill was on the floor. And ultimately, that is part of the process, as much as it's complained about of, why are we doing this on the floor? The floor is televised. The floor is where it's a public place for public discussion. For 4,000 years of Western civilization, going all the way back to the Areopagus in Athens, they would discuss bills and pieces of legislation out in the open for everyone to hear. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Whether it's in the Forum, in Rome, in the Areopagus, in the Wittens, in Anglo-Saxon England, these were all open places for anyone to come and listen and know about what was happening. So it's to me, it's just as legitimate to have these discussions on the floor. And we amend legislation on the floor all the time, like weekly. There is substantive amendments done on the floor of the House for bills. It's just when they don't like it,
It's a
then they
problem.
complain about it. Right.
Yeah, and you guys are so small in numbers that I could understand the argument if you had people that could represent your viewpoints sitting on every committee.
Which we
Th-
don't. Yeah.
Right, but the reality is that you guys, do you have anybody on judiciary? Do you have anybody on ways and means?
Nope. Not a single one.
I mean, that's where the very important decisions are made in those two committees.
Mm-hmm.
So, if they want to make a good faith effort to let you guys put your stamp on the legislative agenda, not on the floor,
Right.
I think the step would be to allow you guys to actually have power on both or either of those committees. Kind of depending on your what percentage of the total Republican body you make up or conservative body you make up, since you guys have been ejected.
And here's the crazy thing on Ways and Means and Judiciary, there are subcommittees that are led by Democrats who are in the super minority um, of the House. So, like, one of the most powerful as far as spending goes, Ways and Means subcommittees, the Economic Development Subcommittee, where like Scout and those big ticket money items come through, is led by a Democrat who has a 0%, the lowest rated Democrat according to CPAC and Club for Growth, is the chair of that committee.
And that is completely at the discretion of the Republican leadership.
Correct. 100%.
That's quite telling.
Mm-hmm.
But turning back, okay, you let's accept that you made your voice heard on the floor because it just seems as though there's not another place to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the things that you said. Um, I think let's talk about restructuring in general. You say that these agencies obviously aren't operating efficiently. Would you say that there are gains to be made by putting things under one roof in general, or are you opposed to that in general?
So let's look at some examples of when this was attested to and actually put into practice in South Carolina in government. When I was a kid in the upstate where I grew up, they took all the Greenville County school districts and put them all under one county-wide school district in Greenville, and they made this claim it's going to be more efficient, it's going to save us money, it's going to be more effective. But it turns out it didn't do any of those things, and in fact grew the entire size of the county school, like the government of the county schools. They didn't actually get rid of those superintendents from the smaller school districts. They just incorporated them into the new district administration and then hired more administrators on top of that. So now they're spending more money and getting less results. And that's often what we see in government when they try to grow something claiming it will fix things. It just spends more money and doesn't fix things. So philosophically, that's my problem with it. Where we could see some improvements, and I don't have an issue, and none of us have an issue with consolidating. So, like, for instance, the Department of Mental Health and the Department of addictions and alcohol and other addictions. Those two things, I think it makes very good sense for them to be one agency because they interact with each other all the time. It wasn't until 30, 40 years ago that they were split into separate agencies to begin with. But when you consolidate like that, in order to streamline and to save money and to be more effective, inevitably you have to get rid of redundancies. And this was something we brought up over and over and over again, just to make it crystal clear that the bill says explicitly, the bill's authors say explicitly on the floor and in committee that during the transition process, which is undefined, no employee can lose their job as part of this consolidation. So that's why I use quotation marks on consolidation is if we're putting them together but keeping all the same redundant staff, why are we doing that? And why in the world would we think we're going to be more efficient and more effective when it's the same people doing the same thing, but now there's two of them doing the same thing, and we're paying both of them. It doesn't make any sense. So that was one of the things we offered, was like, we need to take this out. And we were, of course, pushed back of, well, no, we can't do that. We don't want to dictate policy or how they want to do it, when that's in fact what we're doing. We're exactly dictating policy and how they do it. That's why we're there, is to do exactly that. So that's the lack of the ability to actually streamline and consolidate. And that's why when I said at the very beginning, like, this is gaslighting. The definition of gaslighting is telling you, hey, we're going to do this, and in fact, we're not going to do that. Or we're flip it and do the opposite. They're saying we're going to consolidate, but it explicitly prevents them from consolidating in the bill.
I mean, it's interesting. Like, it would be, I got my two coffee mugs sitting here on my desk.
Mm-hmm.
If they're both half full, I pour all the contents of this one into this one. Okay, well, I don't need this coffee mug anymore. Your argument
Right.
is streamlining would be, get this off of my
Get rid of it.
desk.
Mm-hmm.
But really what this does is, okay, now we've got a third beverage container, which is now
Right.
just over both of them,
Right.
while I still keep both of these on my desk.
Correct. It would be like saying, we're going to create a larger cup about this big, put all the cups inside that cup, and call that consolidation, and say it's going to be more efficient to drink from this giant bucket that we put all our cups in.
I think Merriam-Webster would say that definitionally that is still a consolidation. But as far as, is this something that's streamlining government and shrinking the size of government? While it's something that would allow for that, and that's something that the advocates of the bill are very eager to say, I don't think it's something that necessarily does that.
It farms out the responsibility to do that in the future at some point after the undefined transition period to the new health czar or health secretary. It just says it's something they can do, and they should do. But we're not going to give them specifics on how to do it or what to do and when to do it. It's basically farming out that responsibility to a bureaucrat.
One thing that it's been very, controversial is the use of the term health czar, something you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, the health agencies have a lot of authority, and their leadership is appointed legislatively.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really mind, in this bill or some other bill that passes in the future, the fact that power is getting passed to the hands of the governor.
I don't either. In fact, I filed a bill to do that last year, and it went nowhere.
Well, maybe they've looked at your notes there and incorporated that into their legislation. But I think that's, should this pass, which obviously there's a full court press to pass this, I think that will be one of the better outcomes of this S915.
With some, with a little bit of pushback, yes. I think it would be better for the governor to appoint and the General Assembly to confirm. But I would also like, and I filed a bill to do this too, for the legislature to be able to fire or suspend or have some sort of level of pushback other than cutting their budget on these agency heads with a simple 2/3 vote of both houses. Basically, pass a joint resolution saying, director such and such is suspended because they're bad at their job or they're breaking law or whatever. If they're breaking the law, then there's a function there to impeach them. But if they haven't broken a law right now, the only thing we can do in the legislature is essentially cut their budget or try to replace their board when their board's terms come up, which is not an open and transparent process at all.
No. Yeah, and I do think, giving y'all the ability to pull the brakes, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
we saw, during the COVID-19 crisis at the federal level, and in many states, we've got to give, credit to South Carolina. I actually think that our inefficient and distributed bureaucracy was
Mm-hmm.
great in that it prevented the state from being able to have a cohesive COVID response, which to me was a great thing because I enjoyed having a life and going outside and working. And by the way, not even getting COVID during that whole time.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I will always take a governor appointing somebody who they can fire. Who, this is just a lot more direct accountability to voters over uh, a board that's appointed by legislators who can be lobbied, who are not
Hmm.
nearly as directly accountable because nobody even knows that they're the person who appoints the bureaucrat who nobody even knows exists.
Right.
So, in that sense, the folks who are saying that this is following in the direction that Governor Campbell started as far as consolidating things that the legislature probably should not have in their hands into executive appointments.
Hmm.
I'm supportive of that.
I am too, in principle, and that's why I filed the bill that I did, so that the governor could appoint the heads of all of these agencies. My consistent refrain has been, we don't need a new agency to oversee all of this if the governor can hire and fire the agency heads of all of these agencies. And we can look at merging, like I said earlier, a few at a time, one or two at a time, if that makes sense, without creating all this new government.
The true, as we've said, and I don't want to talk in circles here, but the true fiscal conservative, if we are going to put all of this under one roof, if this is truly an attempt to cut the size of government, it would require cutting the size of government.
Correct. Yeah. At its basic level.
So I don't think there's much more I want to get into on the DHEC restructuring side. Is there anything else you want to get in the air? One thing I will say is, you submitted an opinion editorial to the Post and Courier, which
Mm-hmm.
I thought they really did you dirty when they,
Well,
instead of running your op-ed, just ran an article, going after you and your colleagues. They
mm-hmm.
did print the op-ed on the online version, but for all of their print customers, I don't even think they got to read your ideas at all.
No, they didn't. And I honestly, I should have. It was kind of a reality check. I thought I was kind of jaded and cynical before submitting that, and then I got the response back. Somewhere deep inside of me, I thought surely that even the liberal Post and Courier would be reasonable enough, even if they don't like it, to just say, we don't like it. We're not going to print it. But they took it a step further to, I don't know, nag. I don't know if that's the right word, redline and finger wag uh, about a bunch of, it wasn't even substantive criticism. It was a bunch of nuh-uhs and we don't like this idea. And I think one of them was a shot at my age, because when Governor Campbell was in office, I was like 5 years old, as if I can't read a book.
You got a lot of them
or
behind you. If you've read any of them,
yeah,
you're doing all right.
yeah. I mean, I mean, that was kind of the irony of the whole thing. Is this is something I've studied for 15 years of South Carolina government and the history of it and how it works. And I worked for a former governor. I didn't work for Carol Campbell. Obviously, I was a little too young for that. So it's not something I'm unfamiliar with. And yeah, what they should have done, in my opinion, is just send it back to me and say, we disagree with it. We're not going to run it. And that'd be fine. And I could
You could
shop
have
it
sent it
around
to
somewhere
us.
else. Could have sent it to you guys. Yeah, that's what I'll do in the future. But yeah, I probably should go ahead and send it to you guys if y'all want to publish it on the without the
The diss
Cindy.
track. Yeah.
Yeah, right. The diss track in the background or in the foreground, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, what it told me though is if they freaked out that hard and it felt like they needed to respond in such an adolescent way, such a juvenile way to that, it must have hit the mark. Um, to quote one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Miss Cobb Hunter, a hit dog yelps. Yeah. So that told me I was kind of on target with the criticism if they didn't like it that much. So yeah, it is what it is, and I'll just not submit things to the Post and Courier anymore. We'll go more online and skip the legacy media.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I know a lot of the folks who work for them in the news capacity, and they seem to be
Mm-hmm.
like really, solid
Yeah,
people, solid journalists to me. They go in and, I think that they still have a political slant, which sometimes comes through in their work, but I still think that they're reasonable. But then you get to their opinion editors, and they go off the
yeah,
deep end pretty hard, which is fine. I mean, we wouldn't have a market segment as a news outlet without stuff like that. So God
yeah.
bless them.
The United States, I think, is the only place in the world where we believe this pantomime that news can be unbiased. it is inherently biased. Now, you can try to remove it as much as you can, but when you do that, you basically just get down to, here's the weather and, uh, numbers. And even then you can kind of skew it. Most places around the world and most places, most news and reporting throughout history has had a bias, and they're open about it. That's the best way to do it, is just be open about your bias. Don't pretend like you don't have it, because then you just disrupt your own credibility.
That's the approach I take. I
Yeah,
won't tell people I'm anything that I'm not. I won't tell people I'm a robot with no
yeah,
feelings of my
exactly.
own. But I will say, okay, I'm going to link you back to as much as the underlying evidence of why I
Hmm.
feel the way I feel, and you're free to evaluate it and take from it what you will. But
Yeah,
I'm certainly not going to tell you that I don't have opinions.
yeah. I mean, if you look at England, like in the UK, the Guardian is very open that they're a labor liberal, uh, piece of journalism. The Telegraph is the opposite of that. They're very open about being a quote unquote conservative, their version of conservative um, platform. To me, it's a better way to do it. Be more honest.
I enjoy reading articles from both of them.
Yeah.
Moving to the national news stage, just yesterday, as we're recording this, probably half a week by the time folks are watching this, Donald Trump was criminally convicted, the first United States president
Hmm.
to face prosecution of this nature, and certainly the first president to become a felon. I noticed that you retweeted Jim DeMint's message. We need leaders with courage in Washington and states across the country who will take real legislative action. The left cannot be allowed to continue to weaponize our judicial system against their political enemies
Hmm.
without response from the other party. Specifically, what kind of legislative action do you think exists that could uh, prevent stuff like this?
Well, the founders gave us a menu of options back in the 1790s throughout the ratification process of the Constitution. Particularly James Madison and Thomas Jefferson wrote uh, a couple different papers that were published, the Kentucky resolutions and the Virginia resolutions, and talked about the principle of interposition, where the states can interpose um, between the federal government and the citizens, basically use their position as sovereign states to be a shield or an umbrella or some kind of buffer between a tyrannical federal system and the people. And that's the way it's supposed to work, according to James Madison, who wrote the majority of the Constitution. So that's what we can do as a state. And unfortunately, we have not had a boldness to do anything like that in a long time. In the same way that anyone who's an addict is very unlikely to uh, bite the hand that feeds their addiction. Like the South Carolina, we have a little over $40 billion budget, and only 13.8 billion of that budget comes from South Carolina. The rest is federal money. Now, ultimately, that's our money as taxpayers. Really, most of it's borrowed money at this point. But we're heavily addicted to federal dollars. So other states have pushed back in various ways. So South Dakota most recently said that they're not, when it comes to their health and human services funding, Medicaid funding, things like that, that they were not going to send money to abortion providers, if like Planned Parenthood, for instance. So they carved that out, told the feds, if you got a problem with it, too bad. They went to court and they won in court. And thus far, their federal dollars have not been cut off. Left leaning states, California's, New York's, Illinois, all have sanctuary cities where they've told immigration, we're not going to cooperate with you. If people are here illegally, they can stay, they can participate. In California, they can vote in local elections. So that's, haven't seen any of their federal money cut off. They've had the boldness of their convictions to do that. I disagree with them on those things, but they have had a boldness to do it. We have not had that in South Carolina. And I think at this point, are hopefully going to start realizing that the left is going to do what the left always does. Yeah, they're going to target the system for destruction, to tear down the system that they're in and rebuild it in the image that they want to build. We saw this in every instance of a socialist takeover all over the world, whether it was Mao or Lenin or Ceausescu, or you pick any socialist dictator that wound up in power and go 30 years before them and track that history. The the Bolsheviks infamously targeted the Tsar of Russia. They killed the Tsar and his family. But the Tsar wasn't the actual target. It was the system. And Lenin said this. Lenin, Trotsky, Mensheviks, all of them said this. It was the system that they wanted to take down. And they used the Tsar as basically their target to take down the whole system, to tear the whole thing out. I think that's basically what we're seeing with Trump. Obviously they're not trying to actually kill him, but they're using him via the corrupted justice court system in New York that they have total control over. I mean, like absolute total control, from the judge to the prosecutor to the jury, to try to further downgrade. How nerdy can I get in this? Or can I
Please.
dive deep? Okay. Um, Rewind like 2,500 years. The Roman Republic. So we have the Roman Republic. A lot of the things that our current republic is based on how the Romans were perceived to have done things. Well, the fall of the republic, when it fell into the empire, uh, it did so because there was this degradation of what's called the mos maiorum, or the ancient ways, or the social and political norms or mores of their society. Basically, the way they had always done things, these unwritten rules. They had a constitution. A lot of people don't realize this, that Rome had something called the 12 Tables, that was the result of a kind of a social war between the plebs and the rich people. But beyond that, they had these unwritten rules where you just didn't do certain things. Um, they try to keep violence out of politics. You didn't use the legal system to prosecute your political rivals, which we are breaking now here. And it's something that they broke then. Like the first two Roman civil wars within the Republic were started because one party, for lack of a word, the Optimates versus the Populares, they were maneuvering to use their court system, lawsuits and criminal prosecutions, uh, to hinder and go after their political rivals, and it led to violence. Uh, there's a wonderful book called "The Storm Before the Storm" by Mike Duncan that kind of goes through a lot of this stuff, just the history of how these Moors, this Mos Maiorum, the ancient ways, were tore down and tore apart because of either political ambition, personal ambition, um, greed, or demagogues like ideologues. So the first one was between Sulla and Marius, and led to proscriptions like mass killings of political rivals when Sulla kind of marched back into Rome and won the Civil War. And then a generation later, when the Optimates were threatening Julius Caesar with criminal prosecution when his governorship was over, it led him to make a decision to cross the Rubicon, which is now an idiom 2,500 years later in a different language than he spoke. That's how impactful this was. That they were going to go after him criminally, ruin him, bankrupt him, throw him in prison, maybe execute him or exile him. So rather than that, he took his army, crossed the Rubicon, and became dictator of Rome. He was dictator for 10 years. When that led to his enemies eventually killing him, thinking he was going to crown himself king, and then caused a third civil war. Kind of led to basically just 10 years of chaos after that. And at the end of it, you wound up with Caesar's great nephew, Augustus, being the first Roman emperor. And then you get 500 years of dictatorship. So I'm not saying that history repeats itself. I just really want to paint that picture of when it comes to this weaponization of the legal system to attack your political rivals, it never ends well. It's never ended well throughout history. The They did it in the Soviet Union. As soon as when the October Revolution kind of took the czar down a peg, so he was not really in power anymore. As soon as they were able to do that, the left, the Bolsheviks, the SRs, the Mensheviks started using whatever they could in the courts and lawsuits and with violence to attack those on the right, the cadets and so forth and so on. So that's my concern. I don't think we're staring down a civil war. Um, we have a hard enough time getting people to get out and vote in primaries. I don't think we're taking up arms over this. My concern is this over the next 20 to 30 years, if we're tearing down these social norms, these political norms of these unwritten rules of you don't use the legal system to attack your rivals, then take a look at South America. I mean, we're seeing this in Brazil, where the current openly socialist president of Brazil and his accomplices in the Supreme Court are going after Bolsonaro, the most previous president, and they've taken his passport, won't let him leave. They've essentially put him on effective house arrest and threatened to put him and his followers in jail because they disagree with him. We saw this in Venezuela with the Maduro and his predecessor Chavez. I'm afraid we're going to see this in Colombia with their current president, socialist president they put up there. We saw it in Mexico 100 years ago during the Mexican Revolution and what led up to the Mexican Revolution. So that is my concern. It's not so much an immediate thing. Honestly, I think in the short term, this helps Trump. He raised $38.5 million in small dollar donations yesterday. In a day. And I just saw that 30% of those were first-time donors. I saw there were some Silicon Valley, tech billionaires that got on social media this morning saying that they donated $300,000, $200,000 here to Trump, and saying like, "Hey, we got to get off the fence. This is too far." So I do think they're pushing it too far, but in the short term, it's going to help Trump. In the medium term, the long term is where my concern's at as a society. Like, does this lead to balkanization? Does this lead to, and again, all of this is running concurrently with the theme of we're $34 trillion in debt. No one's buying our bonds anymore internationally. We're effectively monetizing all of the debt on the front end, and our interest, what we're paying on the interest on our debt has now surpassed what we pay on defense and Medicaid. So it is rapidly, and probably by next year, if we continue on this path, the single largest section of the federal budget will be on debt. So we're on borrowed time when it comes to the dollar, going alongside this destruction of the norms. And to reference back to Roman history one last time, and hopefully I haven't lost everybody, there was a similar concurrence of this about 250 years into the empire stage of the Roman Empire, the end of the line of good emperors with the end of Marcus Aurelius. There was a string of quote unquote good emperors, but through that whole string, inflation was going wild. This is literal inflation where the content of the silver and gold in their coins was being cut down and cut down and cut down. And so it kind of reached a fever pitch of inflation about the same time that Marcus Aurelius died and left his insane son Commodus in power, and that led to something called the crisis of the third century, where it was literal chaos for 15 to 20 years.
I thought it led to Gladiator.
Yeah, Russell Crowe, Gladiator, good movie, fun fiction. I think I'm actually looking forward to Gladiator 2. I'm not sure how they're going to do that, if it's the ghost of Maximus or something, but Ridley Scott he makes very pretty movies. But I mean, that's what it led to then. So I'm not trying to doomsay. My goal in looking at all this in totality is to get South Carolina in a place a fiscally responsible place where we're prepared for whatever may come, and on a societal and cultural level, prepare for whatever may come. So I don't think we're going to have to like stand on our own, but the state's going to have to not be addicted to federal money and be more apt to work more closely with our immediate neighbors than we have in the past. Because I don't see the federal government being a anywhere close to even pretending to be a neutral place of discussion or cooperation 50 years from now. Not saying it doesn't exist. I think it'll just look a lot different. And if we're not prepared for it, then the people of South Carolina, like my kids and grandkids, will be much worse off than we are.
So, if you were handed the reins, and you and your colleagues who think the same way were handed the reins, they say, all right, next legislative session, you guys get to pick, what are the five bills we're going to push really hard on.
Mm-hmm.
What would be your policy agenda items that you would go after?
Okay, top five. Number one, absolutely number one, would be an end to earmarks. So earmarks are the currency of corruption in Colombia, where a member, now we have better transparency on it than we used to. Full credit to Bruce and Chairman Bannister and that and
They
on
did
the
the
Senate
right thing
side.
there by publishing what's going on. At least we're not completely in
Absolutely.
the dark.
Yeah, it's not totally in the dark, and I appreciate that. We need to keep moving the Overton window. That can't be. That's a very beginning stage. We need to move that much forward. We need to end earmarks and set up some sort of grant system where one, there's not a political jockeying and horse trading being done for the funding of these projects, and two, we have some follow up to make sure these projects are actually getting done and in a way that they are claiming that they're going to do them. Because I know of at least several instances, one most recently in the Low Country, where a fitness, it's not even a gym because they don't have a physical location, a fitness program was given $250,000 for their operations. This is a for-profit business, and as an earmark last year in the budget, $250,000. They don't have a physical location. Turns out that the owner of that program, of that business, is the client of the lawyer legislator who put in for the earmark. Like he represented her in her divorce
Right.
within the last year. So like stuff like that should not happen. So I would say get
And
rid of
that's
the
not a
earmark
one-off.
system.
This is like just
No,
how
it's
business
common.
is done.
Yeah, that's just normal. Like I brought that up to some people, and they're like, "Yeah, that's not good, but
I mean,
it's
the,
not
the
shocking."
question was just like, well, are they having sex, or is she paying it? Like that's really
Right?
that's really
Yeah,
the only question.
yeah. So, and we have proposals for this. Joe White put up an excellent proposal for uh, each district to be allotted X amount of money, and you can, kind of carry it over a portion of it from year to year for bigger projects. And it's just up to that legislator to either work with their colleagues. They can team up. If some districts are next to each other for parks and stuff, they got to cross district. That's better than what we have now. Stuart Jones has proposed some stuff in the past about having just a pure grant system where these nonprofits, if they or cities or towns, if they need revitalization money, or if they need to fix a highway, or if a sheriff's department needs equipment, then they write a grant proposal, send it in. That if the legislator wants to help them, put their name on it, endorse it, great. But there needs to be a grant system that's totally out in the open and transparent, and where there's follow up to make sure they actually do what they said they're going to do. Last year I think it was $300,000 to the Greenville Zoo to open an orangutan exhibit. I think the town of Loris got $2 million for revitalization, and nothing against the town of Loris, but you could buy half the town for $2 million. Like it's in the middle of nowhere in Horry County. So who knows what they did with it? We don't know. So that would be number one. Get rid of earmarks. one, because it's fiscally irresponsible, but two, but it takes legislators who want to do the right thing, and it gives a club to legislators who don't want to do the right thing to beat over the head of the good ones. To say, literally, this conversation happened. I've witnessed them where people in leadership would say, well, if you want your $300,000 for these lights for this ball field in your district, you're going to have to vote for X, Y, and Z, or you might not get it. And when they didn't vote for X, Y, and Z, well, it got cut. It just didn't make it. Sorry, was the response that they were given. So,
So at that point, if you're a voter voting for your representative who you picked to go to Columbia, and
mhm.
they're getting held up over $300,000 on a light, and that means they're not really voting for what their constituents want. They really have to take whatever leadership gives them, or they're screwed.
Yeah, I mean, if you campaign on, I'm going to bring home the bacon and bring money back to the district, yeah, what you're essentially saying is you're running on, I'm going to do whatever's necessary, principles or otherwise, to get as much money as I can from my area, which is not the way it's supposed to work. Like it shouldn't be about the money. It should be about the principle. And we've lost our way on a societal level. If it's all about the money, we need to have less money in politics in general. Like the government should just have less of our money for this to even be. This would be less of a problem too. So that would be my number two. I'm trying to transition into that. My number two thing is we need to eliminate the income tax. South Carolina has the least competitive income tax in the Southeast. Florida's at zero. Texas is at zero. Tennessee's at zero. Um, Georgia, Alabama, and North Carolina are all lower than ours by, I think, at least 1%. Some are more. Mississippi is lower than ours. We have our income tax is too high. We should eliminate it. If we don't do it, all in one fell swoop, that's not going to give me a whole lot of heartburn. But we need to get to zero. Should be the goal. Uh, I appreciate that we've lowered it 0.1% a year for the last, I think, 4 years. Good. In this, I appreciate that in the same way that if I was starving, I would, I would appreciate a piece of bread. But the problem is bigger than that, and we need to
You need a
keep
whole
pushing.
meal.
We need a whole meal. Um, Number three, it would be infrastructure. So our the gas tax did not fix our road problem, just as predicted. We have a governance problem with our roads, not a spending problem with our roads. So part of the governance problem is the state controls too much roads. There are too many miles of roads in South Carolina. I think we're at 41,000 miles of roads that the DOT is responsible for. We're well within the top 10 of all states in miles that are, yes, that the state controls. We're talking California, Alaska, Texas,
Wow.
New
Right.
York,
I mean, there's 5 states that
big
you knock off
states.
that are massive.
Yes, Florida, like South Carolina's in the top 10. And the reason why this goes back to the 1950s. It was either 55 or 57 when there was actually an armed conflict, believe it or not, between some of the power players back in the 50s about who controlled the roads. And the winner of that was legislative leadership. They set it up in a way, this is back with the Barnwell gang, the Barnwell ring, if you've heard that before. They set it up in a way that basically three legislators, and it could be as few as one, which it was for about 15 years until he passed, could control the whole process of DOT. The funding, the prioritization, what gets built, what doesn't, when it gets built, all of that through the DOT commission. But it's the selection of that DOT commission that's controlled by this very, very small group of legislators that determines all of this road problems. I mean, that's really the root cause of the issue is we don't have transparency. We don't have accountability when it comes to roads. And it's used as a political football by those in power, which means if you're, well, go back 25 years when I'm trying to remember his name, David, when Speaker from back in was from Greenville 30 years ago. Wound up being the ambassador to Canada. David Wilkins. When Speaker Wilkins was running the show, Greenville got a lot of money and a lot of attention in its roads. When Senator Leatherman kind of took the reins as effectively the king of South Carolina for about a decade, he controlled all the DOT process. So much so that the infrastructure bank is, I think, still might be in Florence. They might have moved the offices by now, but I
They
mean,
got some nice
effectively,
roads in Florence.
Florence has some nice concrete roads, and I know exactly where that concrete came from. And it made one family very, very wealthy. So, like, that's what I mean is it's whoever's in power, their region gets all the money. And we still see this. I mean, we get, and this isn't a personal jab, but it's like the speaker's area is going to get $35 million in the last version of the budget that I saw in earmarks. And the Ways and Means chairman is going to get 20 something million dollars in earmarks. It's not a personal jab on them. That's just the way the system works, and they're in the system. My hope is, and what I would say as far as DOT goes, is we need to change that system so that Josiah Magnuson has the best idea I've ever come across when it comes to how do we fix DOT, because it's been floated out there like put the governor in charge, change the committee structure. Josiah said, and he filed the bill to do this: take the lieutenant governor and merge the position of lieutenant governor and highway commissioner. So get rid of or at least put them as an advisory role rather than a decision-making role, the commission. Have the lieutenant governor actually be responsible for DOT and roads, so that the voters,
we got somebody to fire,
they can fire. Exactly. And so this is the kind of pushback on putting the governor directly in charge is, well, the governor's term limited. So if the governor's not, if they slack off in their second term, there's nothing really you can do about it. If the lieutenant governor, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to be a little bit ambitious to try to run for governor, probably once they're done being lieutenant governor. And so the people are going to remember that. It gives the incentive for that lieutenant governor to do a really, really good job at roads. And because we changed the Constitution several years ago, the lieutenant governor has precisely zero constitutional responsibilities in South Carolina other than to keep breathing. That's their only job. The only job constitutionally of a lieutenant governor is stay alive in case the governor doesn't. And we pay them $43,000 a year to be a part-time lieutenant governor and just keep breathing.
Well, Pam Yvette's been quite successful.
She has been very successful in performing those duties. Josiah's idea there, I think, is great. Put them in charge, give them an incentive to do well. We probably need to make them full-time if we're going to do that. So that would require...
If you're going to put them in charge of that mess, you got to pay them more than $43K.
Correct. Because that's going to be a full-time job. And that puts responsibility, transparency, and incentives all in the same direction to actually get stuff done effectively over the whole state, not just in little pockets of whoever's in power. Because that's the number one complaint we get is roads. I don't know, 4 and 5. If I had my way, number 4 would probably be rather than an ESA system for school choice, I would much prefer a refundable tax credit, or something that looks very similar to a refundable tax credit with basically no strings to say, hey, every parent or every kid gets X amount of dollars, to take them where you want. If you want to homeschool, great. If you want to go to a parochial school, great. If you want to go to charter school, great. Or a standard government school, the money follows the kid. There's no strings attached, flat out. That would, to me, be the most effective and efficient way to do that. And it would also incentivize having kids. The stats came out a couple weeks ago. We've now reached maybe a nadir, a bottom of uh, a reproduction rate. And it's 1.58 kids per couple is what we're looking at. That is extinction level reproduction stats. I mean, that's if we keep down that road, we're going to see it in China a whole lot sooner than we see it here because they've been on this track.
And they have a closed border.
Well, they have a closed border and they've been on this track for 30 years. Complete economic meltdown is what we're going to see in China over the next 30 years. They just don't have the people. Um, we need so by doing that, we would incentivize not only education and competition in education, we would incentivize families to have more kids because if you get $7,000 per kid and you only spend $3,500 on private school or $1,200 on homeschooling the kid, you keep the rest of it to take care of the kids. Like that to me is a much more effective way to spend money, uh, both on an educational level and on a family level, um, rather than what we've been doing for the last 60 years, which clearly is not working.
No, that much is clear.
Mm. And I don't know what number 5 is. I got a whole list of things. Judicial reform. I mean, you pick it. There's a whole list of things we could get at, but those would be my probably top 4.
And I think that those are certainly worthwhile priorities.
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone will ask you at the beginning of next legislative session what your priorities are, but I do think that these are things that a lot of folks listening to this will resonate with.
I hope so. And I think most of the population of South Carolina would agree with these things. It's just that I told this reporter earlier this week because she asked about, I think the question was like, do you think every Republican needs to vote the way that y'all vote? In the Freedom Caucus. I said, well, not necessarily. We just think that people should vote the way that they campaign, and 2, in a way that reflects their district. If somebody represents a district that's been Democrat for 115 years, and they're the first Republican to flip that seat, it's a purple district. I can understand especially if they didn't campaign on being, far to the right or whatever you want to label it. I get it. Like if you don't want to vote that way, if that's not your conviction and that's not the way your people want you to vote, sure. That's not what we have. We have for the last 30 to 40 years in South Carolina is people that campaign one way and then don't vote that way. So I'm optimistic that we're heading in a good direction. 6, 7 years ago, there was maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 actual principled conservatives in the House. And now we're up to a lot more than that. And I think we're not only growing via election, my hope is that we'll grow internally amongst our colleagues who are going to be there after the election on either convince them on an intellectual level or at maybe even on a deeper level that, yeah, we can do this. We can vote on principles and do the right thing. And you're not going to get taken out by leadership, which is their constant threat. But we'll see on June 11th how that turns out.
Indeed, we will. Thank you very much for your time, Representative Pace.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.